say that let's call it an implosion, when that happened to The Last of Us, the television series, that mirrors what had already happened with the games. I disagree for two reasons. One, I watched the cutscenes for the second game because it was so controversial. I loved it. It's an incredibly compelling story. And what HBO delivered with season 2 is nowhere near the quality. Some of you might be like, well, it's not doing. They've spread out the second game to maybe 3 seasons? Yeah, we'll see if that actually happens. But I see no path forward to the excellence that was the game, considering the damage that has already been done and the changes that have already been inflicted on it. All right, so that's one. 2, the HBO show had the benefit of hindsight. They knew what they were walking into. Yet they not only still walked into the wood chipper head first, but they somehow managed to make everything worse. Because I very heartily defend the second game, and I think there's no defending season 2. I would argue that what happened with The Last of Us instead is more similar to what happened with Joker. Now, some of you, I'm sure, are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hardly anyone, I mean, there are even people who like Joker too. But I think more people, to be fair, have been enjoying. I think some of you are just willing yourself to like it because season 1 was so good. But yeah, some people genuinely enjoy season 2 of The Last of Us. You're probably like, right now, it's great, Grace. But anyway, it is pretty wild to watch The Last of Us go from HBO's new Game of Thrones at its heyday to the new Westworld, and I'm talking Westworld season 4. Again, pretty wild to have a front row seat for that. Although some of us left our seats and are watching from afar. Now, Westworld, interesting comparison. Westworld ended on a cliffhanger because they were supposed to get a 5th final season. They had been promised by HBO one last season to wrap things up. But HBO, they were like, we're not sinking any more money into this. And you know what hasn't started filming? The Last of Us Season 3. Do you really still think that it will go forward? I would be very surprised, especially because it has so many huge set pieces that are going to be so expensive to bring to life, which is a real shame. I was excited to see those bridges. But now, I don't think... I mean, maybe I'd glance at a set photo here and there or a clip on social media, but I'm not going back to this show. So how did this happen? Let's discuss. So yeah, as some of you might have already written down below, Game of Thrones fell apart spectacularly at the end. Who boy did it? And that, I think we all are on the same page on that one, was due to the hubris of the creators of the show and, the showrunners. And that same hubris is what I believe brought down the Joker franchise and also The Last of Us. So here we're focusing on the people who are in charge of this show, Neil Druckmann, who also was in charge of the video games. Remember with season 1, we were like, that's the secret sauce. You got to have the video game people involved. But we never accounted for them shooting themselves in the foot as well. Although I guess some people who didn't like the second game would be like, I've seen him shoot himself in the foot before. But he leaned into it even more. That's the thing. I do feel there's an emotional component here for Druckmann. I think Druckmann's like, oh, you didn't like what I did, huh? I'm going to do even more of it. And we're like, oh, all right, so I'm just not going to watch. And unexpected results. F around and find out, Druckmann. All right, and then Craig Mazin, who, of course, did Chernobyl, but not a lot of other great stuff. So maybe Chernobyl was just, a bit of luck. Season 1, though, of course, of The Last of Us was quite good. But they made a lot of mistakes transitioning the second game to television. So we got a lot of mistakes to go through. Let's pace ourselves. All right, so they dropped their very successful formula for season 1, and that was side quests. Oh, that's taking small characters from the game, sometimes characters that were only mentioned, and giving them their whole own episodes. This was extremely effective. So when it was announced that Joe Pantoliano, aka Joey Pants, had been cast as Eugene, a character only referenced in the second game, and that Catherine O'Hara would be playing a new character who was his wife, imagine my surprise when they didn't get a whole episode to themselves. What a missed opportunity, especially considering how strong the little we see of Catherine O'Hara's performance. Season 2 could have also further fleshed out Jesse, but instead they actually cut his role down even further. Same with Tommy. These characters were supposed to have much bigger roles in season 2. It's too late for Jesse. I didn't watch season 2. I stopped watching. I skimmed a lot. I skimmed through it. I got the idea. All right, enough to be able to make this video. So the show also had promised that it was going to go more into the backstory of the Seraphites, especially their mysterious leader, who again was only referenced in the game. But where was she? I guess they're saving her for season 3. How many times do we have to tell Hollywood, don't save stuff for seasons you might not get, or sequels? Then I think on that note, it was a mistake to greenlight 2 seasons right away, promising Druckmann and Mazin, that they would definitely have 2 more seasons and maybe even a 3rd extra season, that they would have 4 seasons in total. Because it allowed Druckmann and Mazin, I think, to get too comfortable and too creative. They're like, look how much room we have to play. What should we do with it? And they just assumed that the audience would stay with them for the entirety of their experiment. They didn't think we could walk away. Like for the second game, people did play it all the way through, but that's because that's the nature of a game, and it was one game. Druckmann should have realized that he never asked anybody to come back and buy a 3rd and 4th game. What would sales of The Last of Us Part 3 be like? You don't know. And so I think that, I think that's the main thing I would say on this point, the assumption that the audience would stick with them while they experiment instead of being like, I hate this, and just leaving. Druckmann and Mazin fell in love with the idea of different leads for each season. But for that to work, you have to do a better job with casting and a better job with writing. With all due respect to Bella Ramsey, I don't want to hate on Bella Ramsey. I'm sure she's a very nice person. And I think she's a somewhat talented actress, but she's very poorly cast here, particularly in season 2. So with all due respect to Bella Ramsey, and also Kaitlyn Dever, who I'm not a huge Kaitlyn Dever fan, but I do get that she is a respected actress and certainly has her fans in the industry and outside of it. But if season 2 had starred Callie Spaeny as Ellie and Katie O'Brien as Abby, I think the show would be doing a lot better. Not only because both actresses look much more like their video game counterparts, but I think that they are both able to portray strength, but at the same time, they have a warmness to them, a warmth. And I think that's crucial for characters that the audience is asked to still stay with, despite those characters doing absolutely awful things. I think those actresses both have the same quality that Pedro Pascal brings to Joel, and we're gonna talk about that as well. But back to Ellie and Abby. In the game, in the second game, what makes them still sympathetic, despite their actions, is the pain that so clearly drives them. That's radiating out of the story in the second game. It's really amazing stuff. But on the HBO show, as many have pointed out, Ellie often didn't seem very bothered during season 2. It seemed more like a fun road trip than a path of vengeance. And they really dialed Abby's villainy, I think, up to cartoonish levels. The original point in the second game is that they both might condemn Joel's actions, but they then find themselves doing the exact same thing when pushed as Joel was first pushed. So, that's really fascinating. And I think that that's very much clear in the second game, but I don't see that at all. I don't even know if they still feel they're telling that story in the second season of The Last of Us. Now, as I just said, the second game is supposed to be a story about vengeance. And yet the second season of the show seemed to lose that plot, that directive constantly. And season 1 wasn't even about vengeance. I would say season 1 was maybe about survival, really like a very realistic look at what it would be like to actually live during an apocalypse. I thought that was very interesting. And season 2 failed to get audiences to make the transition from season 1 to season 2. And just think about that. Not only did this show try to change who the lead was, but they changed the format and they changed the message and the purpose of the show. In hindsight, that's just, I think, too much to ask of any audience. So yes, Joel was extremely well cast and extremely well written. So much so that I think they actually ended up making the character more likable than they should have to serve the purposes of the story. Like, I saw Joel get killed in the game, the second game, when I watched the cutscenes. It didn't bother me as much as when I saw that happened to Pedro Pascal on the show. It just came across, I think, so much more vicious and brutal and horrible. And again, the show failed to create a strong character for audiences to run to for comfort. They took Joel away in a horrible way, and there was no port for the storm that audiences then suddenly found themselves in. They were like, I don't want to go ahead. That port wasn't there. Not only is Bella Ramsey's Ellie, let's say, off model from the game version, not only looks like a totally different character, but acts like a totally different character. I have no, like in the game, Ellie is forced to grow up very quickly after what happens to Joel. But for some reason, the show decided to really lean into the disgruntled teenager trope. Like Ellie is a difficult teenager all the way through the second season. She doesn't seem to be growing or maturing at all. Not just emotionally, but even physically. I do think that, Ramsey became, did change their physicality, but I think that over the course of the second season, Ellie should have been turning into a female version of Joel. And I don't think anybody would say that's what they were looking at on the show. I think when you watch the game, that's very much how you feel. I'd also argue that the show and Ramsey as an actor fell into the trap that Hollywood so often does these days, and that is not understanding the very important difference between representation and preaching. It's just really a tragedy considering how good the first season was when it comes to LGBTQ representation. It always felt organic and served the story, and it's mind-boggling that such organic, groundbreaking LGBTQ storytelling, especially in the genre space, that could go so well in the first season and then fall apart so horribly in season 2, and go from the best representation to the worst representation, the worst habits that Hollywood has. Ellie and Dina's romance is certainly a part of the game, and it's very well done, but it's more in the background, whereas on the HBO show, it almost seemed to become the entire point of the second season, more so than getting vengeance for Joel. And Dina almost becomes a main character herself at the expense of Ellie. They don't give Dina her own story. They make Ellie share hers with Dina. So a lot of what you're supposed to see happening with Ellie, you for some reason see it happening with Dina. I mean, Dina's a nice character, but this is supposed to be Ellie's story. Why on earth would they do that? Ellie, therefore, doesn't feel like a full character. She's robbed of her arc. Also, the complexity of Dina being with Ellie yet having Jesse's baby, it becomes, I would say, sitcom-esque fodder here. I really think it was handled poorly, with both women oddly dismissive of and insensitive to Jesse's role in the situation. The show doesn't seem to care either, because they dispatched of him much more quickly than they did in the game. And so in the game, his loss, you really feel it. I mean, here it was still shocking, but in the game, I can't underscore how tragic his death is, because you feel like maybe all three of them could have found a way forward and been happy. But here it feels like the show is like, let's just get this guy out of the way so that Ellie and Dina can have their happily ever after. Now I want to talk about how much Neil Druckmann clearly hates Joel. I know, this is shocking. I mean, his career is defined by Joel. So here's what I think. So I think that Neil Druckmann not only hates Joel himself, but I think it angers Neil Druckmann that anybody likes Joel. Because while he killed Joel in the game, I feel that in the show, Neil Druckmann was like, that didn't work. People still love Joel. Neil Druckmann wanted to use the season 2 to kill the idea of Joel. I'm telling you, it's crazy. So imagine having a Western where the heroic cowboy turns out to be the villain. How do you think that's going to go down with audiences? Now, I'm sure some people will say, oh, that's very clever. But again, maybe if they'd made Joel more of a gray character in the gray zone, maybe this would have worked. But they made him a lovable puppy dog. A little bit of a bite, but hey, we understood it. So I think that, when you have a Western, you're going to attract a lot of people who like Westerns. And so it's weird to then turn around and say to those people, Westerns are stupid, and you're stupid for liking them. I mean, of course you're going to lose a ton of your audience when you do that. And as many of you noticed on the show, when Abby kills Joel, it not only feels more violent this time around, but more personal. And I really do feel it's almost as if it's Druckmann himself twisting the knife. And throughout season 2, I was appalled at how everyone in the show is so, besides Dina, is so mean and dismissive of Joel. Like, I understand that, the show gave them their reasons, but why did it give everyone a reason to hate Joel? Especially because they didn't counter that with the acknowledgement that when the going gets tough, you need people like Joel. Who's going to do all the killing in a zombie apocalypse, right? And why is Joel's, I just thought it was extremely unfair. Like, for instance, when they were like, you can bend the rules for Eugene, and you're like, but wait a minute. Why do we have the rules if they can be bent? Like, why? I just feel like a show that used to be like in the gray zone suddenly is trying to be very black and white in terms of right and wrong. And you're like, what? Again, you're totally changing the show. And I'm going to tell you something in just a minute, but I also want to point out that neither Ellie nor Abby would even have been alive if it weren't for Joel. And they had, not only did they not recognize that, but I feel like the show didn't recognize that. And that's really frustrating. So recently Neil Druckmann gave an interview where he said that, it's not a debate. The Fireflies definitely would have been able to create a cure from Ellie if Joel hadn't done what he did at the hospital. Flying in the face of the brilliant open-endedness, more realistic nature of the story in the video game. Now, as many people have already pointed out, and I agree, you cannot say that it is for sure that a cure would have been created. Because how can you say with absolute certainty that one doctor with limited resources during an apocalypse would not only be able to make a cure, but effectively distribute it? It's ridiculous. So why would Druckmann go out of his way to say that? The only reason I can think of is that he doesn't like the idea that maybe Joel was right. He wants to say definitively, there's no question about it, Joel is a horrible person. And he would only do that because he's like, whoa, so many more people are backing up Joel than I thought they would. It's an insane statement to make. And get this, they went even further. Druckmann and Mazin said, well, we can see that clearly Joel is who everybody likes. So even though we've used up now already all of the scenes he already has in scene 2, maybe we'll bring him back with new scenes. And this is what they said the new scenes would be. They said, you know what? Maybe we'll show the truly horrible things that he did back in the day with Tommy before we caught up with him at the beginning of season 1. Talk about character assassination. Finally, there's the burning question as to whether or not maybe the show shouldn't have killed off Joel. Maybe they could have changed it. Maybe he lives. That would have been interesting. Or they could have not told the story out of order as is done, in the second game. They could have just had everything unfold in the timeline, and then therefore Joel would die at the end of season 2, right? I mean, that would rob future seasons of flashbacks. But in season 1, they did a good job of coming up with new material. I liked the new stuff with Joel's dad. So they could have maybe worked something in a little bit later down the line if they wanted to. Or they could have had Joel's dad be a part of a season 2 that told the story more in order. And again, killed Joel off at the end instead of at the beginning, as was the case in the game. Now, if the show had done a better job with Ellie and Abby, writing them, casting them, and the show more followed the story of the games and the purpose of the games, and that's that the idea of Joel and the spirit of Joel is what ties all three of these characters together. Again, as I said, they might condemn Joel, but then they end up being just like him because, hey, you don't understand somebody till you walk in their shoes. And that's so smart, actually, because in a game, that's exactly what you do in a video game. So that's really great. And I think that the show totally has missed that. So yes, I do believe that the games were always a celebration of Joel to a degree. So season 2 of the show, though, is all about tearing Joel down. A show, whereas, season 1 did such a good job building him up. So they did too good a job with Joel in season 1, and then they just completely ripped him to shreds in season 2. And then they defined Ellie and Abby by their hatred of Joel. So you made everybody love Joel, and so of course they want nothing to do with characters whose only purpose, it seems, is to hate on Joel. And so it was just really, really poorly constructed. And at this point, I don't really think I don't think it can be fixed. This is a video about problems. are there any fixes? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that down below. I don't, because you'd have to recast, and the only way to fix it is to start again. And maybe I think at this point, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I think everybody's had enough of The Last of Us at this point. And maybe to some degree, I'm pretty upset with Neil Druckmann. I really am upset about I think the statements that he recently made about there definitely would have been a cure, and let's focus more on how horrible Joel is. You're like, dude, come on, Joel made you. What a way to show it. So we'll see. That's why I think The Last of Us season 2 utterly failed, and I'd be curious again to hear your thoughts. Maybe you liked season 2. If you did, I'd be curious to hear your defense of it. And then, do you plan to keep watching this show, or do you feel maybe they shouldn't even bother? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.